Hey guys, it's Olivie Blake, and this is me not writing. I'm going to have to kindly ask that you ignore most of my physical appearance. This is a very busy weekend and going to be a very busy week. In all likelihood, I won't do a video next weekend just because I have so many deadlines that are coming up that I need to attend to, etc., etc. I'm very busy. I have many leather-bound books, so on and so forth. Also, those of you who follow my Tumblr know that I have been, or I/was, in something of a down. I like to call them downs and ups as opposed to mania and depression, because you say depression and people make a lot of assumptions. And yeah, that's actually something we're going to talk about today, so that's great. That's great news. I'm mostly fine now. Like I said, moving on. A reminder that Alone with You in the Ether is available. Some of you have finished it recently and have brought me all of your emotions, and I just wanted to say please continue doing that. I appreciate having your emotions. Feel free to tell me what your favorite lines are. I think some people have been like, I know you don't care, which is false. Of course I care. So please, thank you. Please and thank you. All right, I think that about covers it. Let's jump in. I've recently started dating and I'm feeling generally apathetic towards the whole thing. All the men I'm meeting are conventionally attractive and perfectly nice, but after a first date, I don't feel butterflies. Is this normal? Have I been led astray by the idea of instant love/attraction in fiction? Should I be giving these guys a second date? Help. So I think yes and no. I mean, those aren't accurate answers to your questions, but so on the one hand, no, you don't necessarily want butterflies, but instant attraction is not just in fiction. This is something I've said before, but like, I knew when I met Mr. Blake. And I didn't know what I knew. It's not like I was like, oh, this is love at first sight. I don't know. Love is something that, is kind of earned over time. It's something that's built, though, on a foundation of, whoa, something in me has shifted as a result of meeting you. Butterflies, no. However, I don't think you should just give every bozo a second chance just because they're nice and you have no opposition to them. Here's the thing, right? The greatest thing that you can do as a human being is not get married. Let's just remove the idea from your head that like a measure of success of who you are is that you wind up with someone. I think one of the first things is just like not to say you should become comfortable with the idea of never meeting someone, but just along the idea of the way that we do love, the way that it becomes, marriage. You meet this person in your 20s and then you get married and you stay together and you have children. Like, this is a very conventional ideal that's based in social conventions, and you don't need to live that life. So you don't need to give people a second chance just because you feel like you should be heading towards some sort of romantic ideal. That being said, I do talk about romantic love a lot because for me, that's a big thing. I mean, my romantic relationship is by far the strongest relationship in my life, which is not to say I don't care about my family or I don't have friends, but my familial and platonic relationships do not give me as much as my romantic relationship. That is me. That is not true for everyone, nor should it be true for everyone. I do think, though, that you should focus on what these people make you feel. So don't focus on what you feel about him or her or them. Focus on what being with them makes you feel about you, about the world. I think the most interesting thing about love is that it allows you to, in the words of Americana, breathe through the nostrils of your beloved. So, the idea of seeing the world the way someone else sees it, at the exact stakes that they feel it because you're that close to them, that experience of broadening as a person, that is the height, I think, of love. Someone who makes you feel your world is bigger, that it is more interesting, who makes you feel good about yourself, that you are a good, possibly sometimes better version of yourself, or that you feel like they inspire you in some way. They have, your conversation is interesting and makes you still think about things that you talked about. A romantic relationship should be like a friendship in that they bring something to your life. And I don't think, as much as, yeah, that is built over time, I do think you would feel right away that the time you're spending with this person is worth it. So don't go in looking for an instant, this is the one. First of all, if you just started dating, it might take you a while to find the one. I started dating at 13. You know, that's a lot of not the ones. Even with how young I was when I met and married Mr. Blake, that's a lot of not the ones. I did a lot of dating and kissed a lot of frogs. I kissed many, many frogs. And so don't think of this as like a rung on a ladder. You know, dating is not, I'm going to climb this ladder to a destination. Well, no ladders go to destinations. So I don't know, maybe this will check out. Basically, don't treat dating as if you're going somewhere. Don't look for the destination. Just look for, what does this person make me feel? If this is someone you want to spend time with, this is someone you want to see again, not because you want to marry them, but just because you liked being with them and they made you feel good. I actually recently told my friend that she and her new husband, they vibrate at a better frequency when they're together. And I apologize to her because that's a crazy thing to say, but it's just something about being with them that, like, being together allowed them to decompress. It allowed them to be like a more secure version of themselves. She was a little bit calmer. There was just something about when they were together that felt right, that felt good. So I think that you should sense that something about the person you're with makes you feel good. It's actually quite easy that way. And I think, I've said this actually many times, that I think dating is so hard for people, or such a stressful thing, because everybody's looking for that end mark. Everybody's trying to get from point A to point B. But dating is not a straight line. It's not about going from point A to point B. It's about meeting someone who's going to bring something to your life. So you have to want what they're bringing to your life, which is a slightly different metric than butterflies. Hi, Olivie. I hope you're feeling all right. I was wondering what advice you might have for dealing with a mood disorder and how you generally protect and look after yourself, particularly if you have triggers you can't avoid. So I have bipolar. I've talked about it many, many times. I'm sure lots of you are tired of hearing about it. But the reason I specify this is because bipolar is a unique mood disorder in that it has cyclical ups and downs. Cyclical for the most part. You know, when you zoom in on my personal experience, like last week I was in a down. If you were to look at that point on like the graph of me as a human, that's quite low, right? But when you really, really zoom out to see like my whole life, those ups and downs are more like this than like this, you know? It's kind of, I tend to get very cerebral about this because part of how I deal with my mood disorder is that I kind of detach, and I have to sort of intellectually remind myself that this isn't how it always is. A very specific to me mantra that I repeat to myself often, which is, this isn't going to last. This isn't how it always is. Very similar to last week's, this is not the world. This is not my life. And it's very important for me to recognize that what I'm feeling emotionally inside the constraints of my mood disorder is different than what I'm actually doing intellectually. So one of the ways that I have sort of gamed the system of my own mental disorder is by tracking my mood, and I really, really recommend this. Not just for people with mood disorders, but definitely for people with mood disorders. I broke mine down into basically every day I would say what my mood was on a scale of, 1 to 5, just randomly. You can make this, you can track whatever you want to track, but I was specifically trying to track my performance as a writer, and more importantly, my perception of my own performance. Because there were times when I was like, am I actually good at this? And then I would remember, this is not a good time to ask myself that, because my perception of how I'm doing right now is not good. It's tainted by my mood. I tracked myself for long enough to realize that when I recorded my mood as being a 1, I also recorded the quality of my work as a 1. But then I would look back and read it when I was on a day when I felt I was in a better mood and realize it was never a 1. That was just how I felt about it. Like I said, when you track your mood, you want to do this for your own purposes, but it does help you to, I think, kind of make that separation between what's real and what's happening in your head. Granted, what's in your head is what's real for you. So to some extent, you have to recognize that your behavior isn't what's going to change, or your feelings about things, that's not going to change. But you do kind of have to become comfortable with the idea that this is not permanent. For me, it's a coping mechanism. Sometimes it backfires because sometimes when I'm in a good mood, I have that little voice in my head that's like, this isn't how it always is. This isn't going to last. But I think it really is about your outlook. So not to say like you can just decide to be happy, because I don't think that that's true. Obviously, there are a lot of factors working against you sometimes. Probably a lot of factors that other people, a lot of people are going to say kind of crazy things to you, like you should just try to be happy. And they're not wrong, but they're also not helpful. For me, it's not a matter of trying to be happy, but trying to understand that I'm trapped inside this invisible bubble of my own experience, and I have to find a way to zoom out. I have to find a way to realize that this might not be what it feels like tomorrow. My coping mechanism is tomorrow is a different day. It's very important not to get caught up in the idea that this is how it always is, because I think that's where you get the hopelessness. That's where you get the feeling like maybe things will never get better. You always have to believe that statistically speaking, there is a chance that things will always get better. Things will always change. That is the thing that I can promise you. Life always goes on, for better or worse, and change is inevitable. And that's good and bad, because sometimes it'll change for the worse, but also unexpectedly it could change for the better. And like I said, this is my coping mechanism, that I have to remind myself all the time that I do not know how the future looks, and therefore I cannot gamble on what I'm feeling right now, because it might not be what I'm feeling tomorrow. As far as triggers, I do have one that I cannot intellectually get over. There is a person in my life who, if I hear from them, or if they appear, like in my email inbox, for example, the whole day is shot. And no matter how good I am at coping with my actual mood disorder, this is beyond that. This isn't something that's going to show up on my like tracking chart. The tracking is important for like understanding how to work with your mood disorder, but then obviously there are things like triggers that you just can't get around. And I definitely have at least one of those. And I think that identifying what that trigger is super important. First of all, because there is a good chance that you need to just forgive yourself for it. And that can be kind of a long process. The like self-actualization, acceptance thing is hard. Accepting that there is someone who could really set me off that much is very intellectually upsetting. Like I feel like I shouldn't let this get to me. This person should not bother me. My feelings about this are irrational. But sometimes you can't just dismiss them, because emotions are irrational. There is no logic to your feelings. So you just have to accept that this thing triggers you, and perhaps you can lessen the effects of that trigger by understanding where it comes from and why you have those feelings, and working through those feelings, often in therapy, can be something that, like I said, lessens its effects. But that doesn't necessarily remove the actual trigger. That may not be reality for you. And I think that identifying that is important, and saying to yourself that you're a human being with flaws, and there are some holes in you, in your constitution, that can't simply be repaired by self-actualization. That's just who you are, man. Everybody has their limitations, and understanding your own is important, because if you can find them, they can't sneak up on you and surprise you. I think it's important to have someone that you trust, that you can sort of share this feeling with. This is the thing about being in a down, as I've said before, is that not just anyone can make me feel better. I often want to be alone. My therapist and I were just talking about this, that even when I was younger, like especially when I was a teenager, I would often withdraw and just sort of like recede into myself. So my method of coping with my own depression is to crave isolation. And here's another important thing, is recognizing the difference between what you want So when I say there needs to be someone you can trust, that's because you need to be able to ask for what you need. So first of all, you need to know what you need, and you need to know who you need it from. So I have at least progressed at this point in my life to knowing that when I am in this kind of place, the only person who I really want to help me is Mr. Blake. I mean, sure, I want, it's nice to hear from friends. It's nice to hear that people are thinking of me. That's reassuring. But in terms of what's actually going to get me out of, in terms of who can actually give me what I need, only one person can give me what I need. And I have had to learn to ask him for it. And I've had to ask him on some occasions to avoid certain things that might bother me. I have some anxieties surrounding the possibility that people are leaving. When he puts on shoes unexpectedly, for example, that makes me very anxious. Also, if I reach for him and he jokingly pulls away, he can't do that. It's not funny to me. It's never funny. Even though I can recognize, it's a joke, it never feels like a joke. And this is the thing about whoever you pick, however many people that is, to trust, they have to be able to accept that the way you're perceiving the situation is something to be honored on its own. So even if he's just joking, he recognizes that I am not able to accept that as a joke. I am going to feel it the way that I feel it, and he can't make me feel otherwise. That's been a very important realization for us, both of us, because initially I couldn't explain what was so upsetting about it, and I still can't really, because I know he's joking, he's just teasing me, but it's not okay. And having that conversation and knowing that he respects my stance on the matter is this is why he's the person who makes me feel better, who doesn't fix anything, but I'm okay being alone with him. So for me, that process of feeling better, I still want to be alone, but he's allowed in my alone space. So yeah. Anyway, the point is, you want to know yourself, and you especially want to know what it is you need from people, because I think one of the biggest problems I see when people have mood disorders and they're not coping well with it is not being able to vocalize what they need or expecting other people to give them what they need without them having made that clear. Because remember, you are living inside the bubble, the invisible bubble of your experience. So you actually cannot expect people to guess what you need. And it's unlikely, especially, I think this happens a lot, with the other person who said, am I romanticizing things too much? I think one thing we genuinely do romanticize too much is finding that person who just magically gives you what you want. That's really unlikely. It's much less likely than butterflies or instant attraction. You have to trust the person you're in a relationship with, any kind of relationship, enough to be able to say, this is what I need, and then trust them to give it to you without judgment. This kind of went all over the place, but hopefully you get it. Hi, Olivie, just wondering if you have any techniques for getting into a certain character's headspace, where do you start? Also, do you find it difficult to inhabit certain types of characters for any particular reason? A lot of writing is just being strategic enough to emphasize your strengths without sort of tripping into your flaws. So I will say that I can empathize with characters that other people think are unlikable. For me, it's very easy to occupy another person's headspace, which is why a lot of my books are about presenting opposing points of view, because I can occupy both headspaces. If you find that you have trouble inhabiting a character, you might want to think about why that is. Is it because you haven't been able to root their experience in your own? Imagining yourself as a character is the same as imagining yourself in the position of another human being. Strong characterization means that the character feels real, which is not that you like everything that they do, but that everything that they do makes sense and is rooted in the way that they have been designed. So the way that a person is designed is based on, their upbringing, their likes and dislikes. You can make a nature versus nurture thing, but a character is really no different. So my most recent new character is a teenage girl who her family's about to go through a sort of socioeconomic downturn, and her family is going bankrupt. And I have rooted this primarily in my memory of my parents having financial struggles, and the way that it was never voiced aloud. It was never said to me, but I could feel it in just the way they behaved, the way that there were more arguments, or the frequency of argument was increased, or like it seemed to come from nowhere. It just all of a sudden felt like the atmosphere was more tense, it was more fragile. And so I really started from this place of, how would she feel about this, given that probably no one is talking to her about it? And what does that do to her interactions with people? So then I started imagining, say she has a boyfriend or a best friend, what has changed about the way that she might interact with them? How did she interact with them before versus what is she doing now? Knowing only what this character knows and not what I know as a result of being older and more experienced. How would I react to it? How much experience would I have with this? How much would I be able to voice about it? How do I interact with my friends? How am I doing in school? How is my performance in school going to change? What would that do to me? And then building that, separating yourself from the character is just a process of, I don't know, it's kind of like a painting. I read somewhere about how paintings have an underpainting. You don't just like sit down, from one corner to another, the whole thing is painted. You set up the skeleton of it, and that's what you're doing here with this. How would it feel? How would I extrapolate that feeling in order to be this particular character? And how would they be feeling as a result of this specific circumstance? Just wanted to ask if you have any tips on how to read like a writer. So one of the first things I would say, first of all, this is a great question because I think critical reading is very important to me. People have probably noticed this about me, I don't really mindlessly entertain things very often. I kind of want to know like what I like about it and why it entertains me. And there's just a lot of thinking. There's just a lot. There's a lot. Being a little bit critical about what you like or dislike is just a matter of, why do I like this? Why do I dislike it? This is something you'll get better at the more you write as well. This isn't like a read first then write, or write first then read thing. This is just like you're continuing to read, you're continuing to write, and these things will affect each other. But essentially, I sometimes talk about sweat, the author's sweat. There's a similar point made about this with like needlepoint, where on the front it's like pretty and all whole and together, and that's the book. But then you flip it over and you see how the author actually built it, or like that's how an author sees their book. It's just all the threads that are connected, and sometimes it's definitely way messier than the person who's looking at the finished product. Reading like a writer is, I think, training yourself to identify where those threads are, even if the author has ideally been skillful enough to hide them. What are you actually looking for when you're reading? It depends. I think I tend to read certain genres for certain things. So in terms of like the tools in writing, you have pacing, characterization, the plot and the setting, world building. So like obviously you're not going to pick up some literary fiction for the world building. Probably not, unless it's like historical. If I want to look at excellent world building, that probably would be in like epic fantasy, where everything is foreign, you're just getting dropped into a whole new world, and then you want to kind of identify as you're reading the author answering questions at the right times. Essentially, you're looking for in this sense that like the moment you might have a thought about something, you realize the author has given you the answer. Or they have deftly and like a magician directed you away from wondering about it. Pacing is a big one because ideally you want that like can't stop reading feeling, right? And I think that is often based in the pacing. So the character or the author is building the narrative arc in a way where you must keep going and you don't feel like you can take breaks because that build is so constant and so subtle. What book did I just recently read? I just finished On Beauty by Zadie Smith, which I'm pretty sure we will read and spell just because it has such incredible takes. It was very interesting. But I also saw some problems with it. The way that Zadie Smith writes is very fan fiction, where she doesn't write with an outline, like with a pre-constructed outline. She basically just writes and then she edits as she writes. And what happens is then the book is quite long, and mostly she's concerned with like fulfilling points of view. So you get a really good idea of who these characters are, and you do get invested in their stories, but also the pacing is a little bit difficult because following along as she continues to build who they are versus what they're doing makes it so that it's quite a long book. It felt very, you know, Jane Austen to me, actually, in the sort of tone and the humor, and this is not relevant, but it's just a thought that I had. You know, and I can identify that there were moments when I needed to put the book down because she was shifting again to another point of view to tell a portion of the story that she hadn't really set me up for, because it was just where she was going next. That's just something that I observed. There's one book where I felt like the construction was flawed because the plot points felt very convenient. They felt like they had been dropped there in order to facilitate an abrupt shift, or to facilitate a more dramatic outcome that didn't necessarily logically follow. Usually I feel like those are books where it's the opposite, where the author is very much like, this plot point is going to happen and I'm going to make it happen however it has to happen, which is just another style thing. I've read books where I love the voice. Like, I love the actual writing, or the quality, the amount of humor, or the sort of atmosphere of their observations, but the plot is not great to me. You know, there will definitely be times where I'm not especially invested in the characters, not through any fault of the author, but just because my personal experience demands that I care about some things and I don't care about others. So yeah, I think being able to make that separation, this very cerebral thing I was talking about with your invisible experience, of, do you like something because of the way that it was built, or do you like something because of your personal opinions and tastes? I think that is really important for reading critically, and definitely reading as a writer, and accepting that what you create as a writer will, by default, be unacceptable to some people because of their experiences. So yeah, that is generally how I read things. As a mix of, how do I personally feel about this? How does it resonate with my view of the world, or how does it potentially alter my view of the world? And how was it actually constructed? That is more than enough for now. As I said, next week I'm going to need to work. I need more hours in the day, and I need more days in the week. So we're going to skip next week, and then we'll be back the week after that. So yeah, this has been me, Olivie Blake, not writing, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.